Hello and welcome to Thinking Critically, a D&D discussion, a podcast where we deep dive single word concepts or ideas within the Dungeons & Dragons 5e framework. My name is Danilo, and I like all kinds of games and the crunchy mechanics that make him tick. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and I'd really appreciate a like or a follow. Today, I'm joined by Christian Borchert, the creator of the My Sound Delve app. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Christian. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, Danilo. So my name's Christian, and I created My Sound Delve in 2020, which was a brainchild app idea that I've had for almost a decade, looking for an enhancement for, sound effects. And there's just no real good interface out there for sound effects. There's great opportunity for, ambient sounds, but specific sound effects tied to tabletop roleplay was, or is lacking. Maybe I should say was lacking until My Sound Delve. And with the pandemic and the lock-in for 2020, it gave me the capacity to really focus in on it. So I appreciate the opportunity to chat a little bit about it and under the guise of enhancements for today's topic.
Good, and thank you for teeing up our topic for me. So today's topic is enhancement. So what does that mean to you, Christian?
Sure. So enhancements for me is essentially taking that storyline that either you as a game master have created or that you've purchased and you're running through it, and how to make that more engaging for yourself as well as your players. Because essentially, I approach the enhancements as taking that story and homebrewing it, maybe making some changes to match things that I want to bring forward. So one example would be magic items. Okay, especially when you buy a story, it's got specific magic items in there. And I like to kind of escape beyond that or, swap them out. And that sometimes means augmenting that particular encounter. So that would be one example of enhancement. Mm-hmm. I've gotten into collecting miniatures, and these are like the pre-made ones. I'm not skilled enough, even though I do terrain making, which I'll get into in a little bit. The, painting skills that's required for miniatures is just yet beyond my comfort zone. So I buy the pre-made ones, and I've been collecting them since 2003. So that was an enhancement that I did for our tabletop. And then I got into terrain making. And so I use a variety of mediums, from the Hearst molds for casting with a plaster, very hard plaster. I use Hydrostone, and that's really good, but it's heavy, and it's great for set pieces for like a mob or like a boss scene. Mm-hmm. And then I also use things like foam core. I use things like polystyrene foam. I use things like cardboard, and using the faux finishing techniques, you can mock up something that can be good for that session. And then if you make them more modular, you can then reuse them. So for instance, I'm running a mini campaign, Rise of the Rune Lords, coming up here on this Wednesday for 7 sessions. And I'm reusing something that I created for a Starfinder session. And it was actually a heart. So the group had to fly into this heart that was sitting in space. It was just kind of this magical portal. And so you go walking through the portions of the heart. And so it was like red. And so I used paper mache and painted it all red. And now that it's going to be a cavern, I painted it black. And so some of the red is coming through. So it's going to be kind of like this, like you're going through lava tubes kind of thing. So it's kind of cool. So I'm repurposing that. So that's another example of an enhancement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. There's a lot there. And what I really love about this podcast is, I think the thing you opened with was homebrewing pre-made encounters too, in order to enhance them. And that was not on my list of things at all. So I'm really happy that we're bringing all these ideas together. So let's start with that one. And for people that listen, they'll know that I don't have a huge amount of experience with pre-made modules. I know of them by name only and by maybe reputation. But in terms of running them or having played them, I have very little experience. So I'm really going to err on, rely on your expertise here in terms of how do people enhance the pre-made modules. And I'm probably aware of the usual ways, like tweaking combat encounters and making things more difficult and adding in NPCs. But are there any kind of go-to things you use or tips or tricks that you have some experience with when it comes to increasing the enjoyment of pre-made modules?
Yeah, one of the things that I like to do is live on the edge of TPK. And that may sound terrible just to your listeners, but...
Do your players like you living on the edge of TPKs?
Well, there's great reward with great risk, right? And so sometimes the module that you buy builds up to a mini boss fight, and then you've got to go through some other things, some lesser minions, or some challenges there. And so to make it more interesting is to put in traps, to put in things that they have to rely less on combat exclusively, unless you're running just a straight dungeon crawl where it's just room after room after room of monsters, and sometimes that's fun. But it's also nice to supplant in other challenges. So, your skill checks, because otherwise, why are you building your character around certain skills if they're not utilized? Yeah. And so, putting those challenges in, whether they're in the module or not, can be a lot of fun, right? So every door shouldn't be locked, shouldn't be trapped, but some should, right? And so you build some tension in the storyline, and whether it is in the module itself or not, you read through it and then you match. Now, I have a challenge with our player groups are typically large. So right now I'm running a group with 8 PCs.
Wow.
That makes it very hard for when you're doing minions, right? So what do? Either you throw in a whole bunch, right? So like I'm running a thing right now where it calls for 6 Shadow Mastiffs. Okay, well, is 6 a good number against 8? And you also don't want to ramp it up so that the XP that's awarded is too high, right? So you want to kind of take a step back and look globally at that advancement, and you don't want your characters to level up too quickly, but you also don't want to have them level up too slowly. So it's this wonderful exchange of putting the right ingredients in. So you create that tension, you create, bosses. So, like the last boss battle I had, I essentially wove in more creatures. So there was 2 rounds with, these 2, so they softened them up a little bit, and then I brought in 2 more, right? Sometimes even though a creature can do certain things, as a game master, you're disallowing some things, right? So like demons can bring in more demons. Well, if you don't want that encounter to last 3 hours, maybe you don't do that, right? Or maybe you have them bring in some lesser demons and not, another Vrock suddenly shows up, right?
Yeah.
Because it's, it's already getting to 1:30 in the morning and everybody's getting tired. So keeping all of that in mind, I will weave in new individuals, new creatures, to keep that tension going. And it's, like I said, we've come very close to not TPK, but we've come very, very close to, losing all hit points, and, people, they've had to retreat and come back. And that really, like I said, the tension that's created by putting just enough challenge there that they feel challenged, so they're not walking in all overconfident and cocky, like, oh, I'm just going to clear the battlefield and then just go to the next combat. And so that's important. And so looking at what you've purchased or revisiting what you've created, has it been challenging enough or not?
Yeah, it's that Dark Souls balance, isn't it, of making it challenging, but then the reward is that much more gratifying.
That is correct. And then also putting in magic items in weird places, right? So there's a pool of sludge, well, there happens to be this really awesome ring down in there, right? And so if the party doesn't find it, well, that's shame on them, right? Because they didn't fully explore the scene before moving on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Maybe one day I'll pop my cherry and actually run something that somebody else has made.
There's great content out there now. I mean, there's never been more modules available at your fingertips, and so I typically will look for a module that is actually slightly higher in terms of character level match. Like I said, because I've got larger groups, and so they need more challenge rating.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's always the difficult part of DMing, is that balance of making it a tough piece of combat so they don't just cakewalk their way through it. And I can only imagine how tricky that is with 8 players. It's difficult enough for my 6, so 8 is just a whole nother world that I don't even want to think about.
Right. Yeah. One time I thought this worked actually fairly well. So I had the party go through a portal, and they went to a brand new universe. And what ended up happening there was the cleric lost her connection to her goddess, and no more spells. Uh-oh. So she was like, okay. She went back through the portal and disappeared right back to her universe. So that left the party needing a replacement. So they went to the local church and they found a new cleric, but that required a tithe. And so they did the same thing for a paladin, because there was another character, a barbarian, that had gone back, and so they needed a tank. What that did was it set up a storyline so that the party, no matter how much loot they got, they were bound to a 20% tithe. So I was able to give them more magic items because I knew they had to give up 20%. And so they could kind of pick through the best and give the rest to the church. It also gave them local knowledge, which was helpful for storyline.
Good. That's quite a nice way of getting players to have that feeling of power, but having that tool in their back pocket to say, okay, but it's not forever. So talking of DMing, or being the games master, what has really improved the quality of your experience or the standard of your dungeon mastering? It's a bit of a awkward question in that it's hard to kind of have that introspection of, okay, how have I got better, or how have the quality of my tables improved? But it's not actually, because I overthink things a lot. And so my particular group, we play, if we're lucky, 4 times a year. Wow.
And so it has forced me to think about ways to enhance the game so that they keep coming back. Because there's a 2.5-hour drive, 3-hour drive for one guy, and then to my house. And then oftentimes in the winter especially, we'll go further north toward Canada and hole up in a cabin for an entire weekend and play. And so we're looking at, 3 to 6 hour drive for folks to get together physically.
Wow.
So the whole pandemic thing has put us in a situation where we've been Zooming, but I hate the online play. It is just listening to myself talk for 6 hours at a time.
Yeah.
And it lacks that fellowship. So ways to enhance and kind of buy-in is, one way I did it was I give the players assignments. So they keep track of the buff. I made a buff sheet with Excel, right? So it's got all of the, prayer, aid, etc. And so, haste, +2 for attack, -2 for this, right?
Yeah.
Or, bull strength. And so you got to keep track of all of that stuff. And one person is responsible for that. I also put somebody responsible for hit points. I make somebody else responsible for keeping track of all the treasure. And someone is the scribe. And so that way, that frees me to just lead the session and not have to keep track of all the player stuff, as well as all of the monsters and everything that I've got enhanced and prepared. And since the app that I made went live in November, we've been play testing with the app. And so we've all like prepared. We've looked at our sheet of things that our character can do, right? In terms of, I've got these weapons, I've got these spells, I've got these skills. How can I make a scenario inside the app that reflects that best? Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's been this iterative thing, right? I mean, it's this concept that I came up with, and all my players have kind of acted as advisors and beta testers. And it's been fun. And one of the enhancements that we're working on now with our developers is the multi-attack. So it works really, really well for lower level characters, but then as your character's advanced, or as I'm transitioning into 5e, I'm looking at all of this different multi-attacking options with different weapons, maybe an at-will spell or spell-like effect, as well as a weapon. And so we're looking at, linking our scenarios. So you build a scenario for a magic missile, you build another scenario for your mace or, your dagger or whatever. And if you can do both of those at the same time for one attack, we're figuring out a way to actually make that happen. And March is going to be our release for that.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Yeah, I really like that idea of giving the players assignments, and I can see that it being a necessity for when you have 8, because even when I've got 6, it's tricky enough to remember, who's concentrating, who's got hex on one of the 12 NPCs, and I think I'm going to try and float that idea with my guys when I start back again soon to say, okay, who wants that responsibility? Who wants to help me help you? Because exactly like you said, it's just going to free me up to really concentrate on what's important, because ultimately, funnily enough, concentrating on who's concentrating isn't really fun, or it's important but not really the game, if you know what I mean. The game is the interactions and what's happening, and the role play and the blow by blow, moment to moment kind of stuff.
And I will say one other thing that's helpful as an enhancement is we purchased condition cards. And so, if somebody is, dazzled, or somebody is confused or whatever, we literally lay the card on the table near the combat scene, right? And I'll put a die on it for how many rounds. And so that really helps me not forget it. That's just one way to keep track of that thing, because it's visually right there in front of you. You literally can't forget about it. And so when it comes back to that character's round, you just, turn the die to the next number down.
Yeah, I've looked at little plastic rings before that have the status effects on them that you
people
hang.
Use tokens for things, and colors for things, and some people will put little markers for if you've got 6 shadow mastiffs coming out, right? How do you keep track of which number is which? And there's just different mnemonics for doing those things.
Yeah, and well, I know from experience that just remembering it doesn't work. And one thing I have to say is I've tried a couple of virtual tabletops to play remotely. Just we're in exactly the same boat you are, of having to migrate online because of the world, and they have methods for marking a particular character token as blind, deaf, but it's so easy to miss in the heat. When I'm like deep DM zone, it's so easy to miss some tiny little pixel, 5x5 pixel icon.
And then it sucks to have to recon, to like go back and make it. You're like, like somebody, brings forth an elemental or something, to play, during the combat or whatever. And, they forget about it. They skip the turn. Like, oh, well, too bad. They didn't go. Sorry.
I hate that kind of stuff, just because it just undermines the whole thing, right? Like if someone it realizes just a little bit too late that oh, hang on, he was concentrating on one spell, so he couldn't have cast that other one. That it's just kind of like, oh, well, now we're just in the mire of, well, DM, what do we do? Oh man, the other one's dropped. Fine, move on. But it's just a lose-lose situation, because the player might not have wanted to do that or whatever and whatever. So anything to stop that from happening, sign me up.
Yes. And I don't know about you guys when you play, but we will often drink. And like I said, it's fellowship. And so we, especially when a critical occurs. And so when it's on the player side, everybody's really happy. And when it's on the monster side, everybody's not so happy, right? But we still yell social, and we make a go of it. And I will say that I have found, because I have been able to play test with my group physically, and so when somebody has a critical occurs at the table, and you've got a group that is a large group, different people are hanging out the couch or whatever, and I will say that when like a critical hit happens or a fumble hit happens, and I'm just gonna share one with you. Here's a bludgeon smash. Right? You hear that at the table with our app, they're suddenly re-engaged. Boom, right? Suddenly, oh shit, right? Of course, we're going to hear social with that as well. But the same will hold true for some funny, and I've got a lot of funny different fumble sounds. Like it's silly, but it's engaging, and ultimately, I view it as an enhancement because it's controlled by the player, right? So the way we design the app is it's a player tool as much as a game master tool. So you reference some of the online tools that are out there, and they're very, very, very GM focused, right? And that was one of the things that we wanted to turn on its face and really make a player-centric tool.
If you can, of course, trust your players not to spam.
True.
Obviously, you mentioned before we started recording, and also briefly there, about you were slowly transitioning to 5th edition. I was going to ask, how do you think 5th edition has been enhanced over previous editions, say 3.5 or other tabletop RPGs, older editions?
Well, I have heard and experienced players and people posting stuff that 3.5 was overpowered, right? It was not balanced. It was misbalanced, right? And then Paizo took that and kind of tried to make a balancing act. And so they made some specific changes to it. And I have to say, I'm just getting into 5e. I mean, I've got like 50 books for 3.5, so I'm very enamored with that. And I don't mind the overpowered. I mean, I love the thought of characters as superheroes, right? And so they come into town, they look amazing, right? They got all this armor, they've got some crazy companion animal, right? I mean, it literally is some rock group coming to town, right? I mean, it's just I mean, think about it like that. And then they come in and they can do some really amazing uber things. And if you overpower your monsters, you're meeting that. So I never really loved that argument. And yeah, there's some characters like a druid can be incredibly powerful in 3.5. And I think that what I'm hearing and what I'm starting to read about 5e, it's a little bit more, it's an attempt to be more balanced. It's an attempt to make combat flow a little bit better. And so that's cool, right? Because, I mean, one of the reasons why we built the app was to make that combat flow faster. And so that's one of the things that was addressed, which I think is a good thing. And so I like going to the bookstore and being able to see what's the current thing and pick it up and play it, or read it and have some applicability to what is going on in my life. And so I've missed that, right? So I'm looking at the 5e stuff. I bought it for my 12-year-old son, and he's going to be teaching me a little bit as I transition from 3.5 to 5e. Although I'm also playing Starfinder, which, right, is a Paizo game, and it is Pathfinder in space. Love the fact that it's, still very 3.5, although the game mechanics are challenging for combat, but I love the added starship combat, and I recently participated in a Kickstarter campaign for a game called Dark Matter, which is essentially 5th edition D&D in space. Okay. So unlike Starfinder, where they nerfed magic and kind of repackaged it, but what Dark Matter does is it takes all 5e spells and brings it forward into the future. And then adds on top of that some technological and sci-fi elements. So there's starship combat, you've got your lasers, your plasma, but you still have all of the stuff that you've brought forward from 5th edition. So you've got all of the spells, which is really, really cool.
That's just given me a great idea for my players at some point in my campaign to have them flung through some time portal into the future, and then
absolutely.
just be like, there's lasers, and you're in the middle of a grim dark war, and
yeah. So I'm looking at the idea, and I've talked with a couple of my players about it, and just to gauge their receptiveness, right? So, and that's the way I lead sessions and rule, if you will, as a game master, is very collaboratively. So my thought is when we do that transition and we're running our fantasy players as well as our Starfinder players, if we really like 5th edition, because we know we really like the science fiction setting, what about taking our science fiction characters that are playing in Starfinder and having them run through, like you said, like some universal portal? Suddenly they're in a brand new realm, plane, universe, whatever, and all of their Starfinder stuff is stopped. And now for their new enhancement, they have to choose things in this new realm. So, my envoy, maybe I'll go into Bard, right? Maybe I'll be a rogue, right? Maybe I'll be a wizard, right? Or a sorcerer, or, whatever. And so they're going to multi-class. They're kind of forced to. So everything from, 12th level or whatever back remains static as Starfighter. So those books still remain viable for us. But then we've got this other thing. So we're contemplating kind of doing this hybrid thing, which means I can use either science fiction modules or I can use fantasy modules. It really is kind of the oyster opens up for us.
Yeah, I'm just thinking 8 players, everybody's hybrid multi-class between settings. Man, you are a glutton for, for complexity.
Yeah, well, one of the things about the 8 players is that's on the Starfinder side. And what we've done is, luckily, I've got another player in my group who game masters as well. And so we're taking turns. So we've got essentially right now our goal is to build up to 20 player characters in which our 8-person group can pull down from to run missions. So right now I'm running mission 1, the other game master's running mission 2. We're doing them simultaneously, and so he'll run a session or 2, then I'll run a session or 2, so that way, we can both play and lead, and then we'll have, because we're trying to flesh out this huge cruiser starship, which requires 100 people to operate. So we're looking at we're staffing it up, right? And so we need 80 NPCs, and then 20 PCs, and then, a mixture across all classes, all races, and then that way when we've got a mission coming up, we can leave the cruiser, jump on our destroyer, with a commando group or whatever to run down and run that mission. And so what's happening is it's creating an opportunity for us to just have short sessions. And so, we've got a mission coming up, but only, 3 of our 8 can play. All right, well, we're just going to run a small mission and pull down those characters that they want to play and roll with it. So somebody can create different characters, and they can run different characters based on that particular mission's protocol, right? So I don't have just one character. I only play a barbarian, or I only play one thing. No. You can have multiples, and depending on what that mission calls for, right, grab that character and move them into the mission. So it really offers us a great amount of flexibility.
Yeah, I was going to say the flexibility and how agile that is to accommodate a group of varying size is super useful. What's really cool since we've been talking on this episode is how different and varied our experiences are and how we play at these games, and yet we're obviously still aligning on quite a number of topics. So obviously mine is very, very 5th edition. In fact, I am almost blinkered in my knowledge of tabletop RPGs to 5th edition solely, so there's going to be some bias in there. And we started playing in person. As I said, there's 6 players, and we started maybe half the campaign in person, and then we transitioned online when we were forced to do so, and it's been okay. It's not been without its issues. The inevitable connection issues. One player, the rest of their house is just smashing Netflix, so they have to turn their camera off, or one player's kids are acting up, so he has to step away for half an hour. That's the nature of the beast. But overall, it's been relatively successful. It saddens me to think of the number of campaigns that have had to stop because the transition just doesn't work for whatever reason. So in that regard, we're quite lucky. And on the other hand, some things have been enhanced by it. So we started using Roll20 as our virtual tabletop. And the limitations of the free version became quickly apparent. I picked my words very carefully there. That's the nice way of putting it. We ended up migrating to a different virtual tabletop called Foundry, and we haven't looked back since. I have to say, adding it in like dynamic lighting, for example, and kind of field of view and fog of war, that kind of stuff just adds so much more than I could ever add to a tabletop, me personally, than I could ever add to a tabletop. When we were doing encounters before, I have a dry wipe. This is going to sound like woefully garbage in comparison to what you were saying you were doing earlier on. Like, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you how little we had. I had a dry wipe thing and some pens, and that was pretty much it. Here are the walls. Here's the pillars, and put your figurines down. Is that Space Marine from 40k? Yeah, don't worry about it. Just put it. just forget it's got a bolter. That's actually a cultist today. That's where we were. So,
I understand. When I started, it was the dry erase mat, right, and Lego figurines that were medieval Lego figurines, and essentially, right, a 1-inch square is supposed to be 5 feet, and this figurine is huge, in comparison. So, so quickly I was like, and then Wizards of the Coast came out with these awesome sets, and so I just started buying them. I run a sales job, and so when I would have a successful, sales, and I take a little bit of that commission, and I buy some figurines, and my collection now is, I don't know, about 3,500 strong. And so, it's great, but there's a complexity to, like, I was just reorging them. I've, constantly touching them and reorging them and keeping, similar things together. So I've got a box of dragons. I got a box of demons. And I've got a session coming up. And so what I do is I go through and I use baggies, little Ziploc bags, and I'll put the figurine in it. And then I use these initiative cards that, I forget, Modern 20, I think, put it together many, many years ago. And so it's just a cheat sheet, and it's about an index card. So I fill one out. It's got all of the stats, right? AC, combat, all their attributes, saving throws, everything. And then I'm able to keep track of their hit points on that sheet. And I use it as part of initiative. So we all roll for initiative, and then I put all of the sheets together in correct order. And then if somebody's, falls down, they're unconscious, I move it to the side on one side. And then if somebody's got, they skip a turn, like, oh, I'm going to delay, I move it, to another side. And I just kind of keep track of it. It's very tactile for me, but it works, right? And when we're ready for an encounter, I have that baggie all set. And so I grab the monster, and inside that baggie is also that particular initiative card. And so I grab it, and we'll use that. And that has been a very effective way to keep track of those things. But yeah, to your point, it's really more about the story, the fellowship, and the collaborative play than it is about anything that's on the table or on the screen, right?
Yeah, we haven't. miss playing in person, obviously, of course, as we all do. Seeing other people is just human nature. And we've had a lot of benefit from moving to this virtual tabletop, and my ideal world would be a way to have that instead of my dry white markers on the board, and then somehow project it onto the table. That would be my career goal, but I don't think that's quite trivial to do. Also probably hampered by the fact that we were playing at not at my house, so I would always have to cart my gear with me, 2 big bags and
Danilo, 2 bags would be awesome. I mean, when we go up north to the cabin, I mean, I've got, and that's part of what I used to do, is bring everything. Mm-hmm. And then my collection became too great, so I needed an ability to just condense. So I only bring that which I need. So I bring all my elementals. I bring all my creatures that could be summoned. Right, those are in little totes.
Yeah.
But I've got all these books, all these and the terrain, all of that stuff. And there was a couple times we got snowed in, and we had to leave our cars at the mouth and walk about a mile and a half in to the cabin and back. And but you know what? It's fun, and we don't have a lot of time for exercise, right? When we're sitting for hours and hours playing these sessions. So it's nice to take a break, get outside. And I will say that experience for me, I know I'm kind of trying to weave in here because we're trying to promote our app as part of this dialogue. But when you download the app and you play it, it requires no Wi-Fi, no data to run.
That's handy.
It's all stored locally. So and that was like by design, because that's the way I like to play. I like to disengage when I'm physically with all my compatriots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is super handy, because I must admit I've been caught short before, either, as I was saying earlier on, technical difficulties, the Wi-Fi gets a bit spotty, and I've lost all my monster stat blocks because a lot of them are online, and then it becomes a very obvious crutch that impedes the experience.
Totally. You mentioned Roll20 and Foundry as, online maps and kind of an interface to play, right? And we live outside of that, right? So because of licensing, our sounds can't be embedded in those kinds of, jukeboxes or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, we rely on having your phone connected to a Bluetooth speaker, and then your speaker, attached to a, laptop or whatever. And it works, right? You just heard a couple of the sounds come through, and maybe they're a little bit grainy, but it works, right? They come through. And the other thing is the tabletop terrain. I've got my laptop and my webcam focused down at an angle so that people can see it. Not bird's eye view, right? Not top down. And so I'm often, telling people, exactly where they are or whatever. But like you said before, there's been some limitation to it, but at least we're able to move our stories along. Right? We're able to be together, not physically, but in spirit, and again, working collaboratively on, solving those challenges and those problems that are within a module.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the one thing that, again, I want to talk to you a little bit more about is, you mentioned at the beginning, the terrain that you make, and I can only imagine that adds quite literally another dimension to the to the tabletop experience. I had some hangover stuff from my Warhammer days, and some various little bits and bobs that I'd 3D printed for other board games over the time, but nothing what I would consider terrain. It would be more like a chest or a pillar or anything like that. So I don't know if you can tell us a little bit more about the terrain side of things and how that's made your experience better.
What you're describing there would be considered scatter. And so scatter is actually just a perfect place to start. Like, if your listeners are interested in terrain, I would recommend starting with scatter, right? So you've got your board, your dry erase board, and you're putting in a pillar. You're putting in a chest. You're putting in a desk and a table. You're putting in something that helps enhance that experience, right? So you've got your little figurines, and those little pieces are very, very helpful visually. What I found was I started doing three-dimensional work, and so building up with walls. But I quickly found a limitation there, especially for today's play where you're looking at through a webcam at an angle. So there's a gentleman by the name of Scotty McFarland, and he's known as DM Scotty. Mm-hmm. He's got a wonderful YouTube channel, and he walks through how to use very inexpensive material like cardboard and to give the flavor of a wall without building that three-dimensional wall up. That way your hands can go into the table area, you can move your figurine around, or with today's online sessions, you get the semblance of a wall. And essentially what it is, Danilo, is a flat piece of cardboard, right? And so let's say the room is 8 inches by 10 inches. Mm-hmm. Around that wall, you're going to glue in a 1/4 inch piece of foam core that you get at the dollar store.
Yeah.
And it's the stuff that you would do like for a grade school report, right? You cut it into strips, and then you pull the piece of paper off of one side. You glue the other side to the edges. And what happens is, because it's foam, you can then use like a crumpled up piece of what you would say is aluminium, right?
Yeah.
To give some texture on that wall. And then what you do is you spray paint it black. Then you just kind of gently go over with a little bit of gray. And now you've just created a dungeon wall. I mean, it is literally that simple. I mean, it's super quick, and it is so cheap that you don't feel compelled to store it. I mean, you can, obviously, right? But you can create these things and just literally throw them away because they cost very little, and it was very, very quick to put together, is my point.
Yeah, if it gets like crunched up in your bag, no one's gonna be crying about it.
That's right. Yeah, so you don't have to invest in I've got these these molds, these silicone molds, and I mix up plaster and all that. I got really, really into it. But what I have found is, like I said earlier, that's great for like a mob boss scene or whatever. But if it's just like a hallway or just a simple room, or you're trying to convey, so you going to a merchant area or whatever, you don't need all that. You can really get away with just a nice piece of cardboard with some faux finishing on it. Now, if you like the grids, then what you'll want to do is, instead of using cardboard as your flooring, you'd want to use foam core. And what you would do is you would literally slice through those grid lines, right? 1 inch by 1 inch. And so you make a pass with a blade, right? A box cutter.
Yes,
and then the cool trick is to take like a mechanical pencil or a pen and scrape through it again and again and again. And then you'll want to use that texture to texturize. And you can put in cracks, just use a pen, throw in some cracks or whatever, and then spray paint it black, layer on your color. And then a trick that I learned from another crafter, Black Magic Craft, what Jeremy does is he mixes up a Mod Podge solution. And what happens there is when it glues, it hardens. And the other trick is to avoid curling, is to turn the piece over and use a glue, like a 50-50 glue to water mix. And what happens is it saturates the paper, but then the glue hardens. And so it helps keep it in place, right? And then you could use the Mod Podge on the bottom.
Yeah.
Right? So don't forget the bottom, because otherwise, as the Mod Podge, the paint dries, it might curl, because that foam core is not incredibly strong on its own. It needs some enhancements. And so one of that would be like your Mod Podge or your glue, your PVA glue mixture. And so that will actually pull it back. And so it's like this two physics, like that. It wants to curl up. No, I want it to curl back, right? And so you need to layer the back.
Yeah. We do have, especially where I live and throughout the UK, quite large hobby stores and craft stores that will do all that kind of stuff. And
yes.
yeah, admittedly, I'm, as I said, my previous experience was in Warhammer 40k, which a lot of the terrain is purchasable rather than buildable.
Yes.
Which is my lazy man's way. I mean, still have to paint, unfortunately, which is, I'm just like you, my painting skills leave a lot to be desired. So.
It's interesting. I've gotten better, and I'm pretty good with faux finishing because as hard as it sounds, it's actually not. It's that fine, and, my being able to look at a figurine and really get in with the paint is a challenge. Mm-hmm. But I play Gaslands, right? Osprey Games Gaslands, which is a really fun skirmish game, and it's using Hot Wheels or Matchbox cars and then making them look all apocalyptic and then running a death race. And what you do is you break the car apart, and then you spray paint it all black, and then that way you're allowed to faux finish on top of that. And then you glue on pieces. I bought them from Etsy. If you've got a 3D printer, you can, print off a lot of different weapons and different things that you can put on your vehicles. Mm-hmm. And man, that's a fun game. And then you create scatter so that you can create your boundaries for your race. And again, I use the backs of like the cereal box, right, as a very thin cardboard. I use packaging from Amazon or whatever to get some cardboard. Cardboard's super cheap. I mean, so terrain is really, really helpful, and I would recommend just starting with the scatter pieces.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, especially after Christmas, we had a house was full of bloody cardboard that we couldn't have got rid of quicker.
It always takes us like three or four recycle runs to get rid of all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, you waited for the bins to be taken and then filled it up again immediately the next day. So
Correct.
Yeah. So I've got another 3D printer coming soon, an upgraded one, which I'm looking forward to getting back into doing some higher quality and scatter terrain, and maybe get back on the minis, which is always a bit tricky.
Yeah, but I mean, your doors are going to be really helpful, right? I mean, and there's lots of ways to... Wylock's Armies is also another good terrain reference. Uh-huh. And he's got a system in which he locks indoors onto his little set pieces. I mean, there's so much out there, and it doesn't take an incredible amount of skill. Mm-hmm. And I'm not downplaying these guys at all, because they've come up with some really great concepts. I'm talking about your average player or game master who wants to do this, right? And it's also something you could assign to your players, right? If you've got anybody that's got any kind of interest in these things, hey, buddy, could you mock up 8 doors, and mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome, sure. And here's some reference. So, I mean, you could again, everything doesn't have to rely on the game master, because I think too much does.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the one thing I found with my players as their power level increases they're still in, I think, officially tier 2, as it's called. They're only level 8. But even, 6 players at level 8 out of 20 is how it works in 5th edition, is complicated enough. So I'm absolutely gonna think about giving them tasks and giving them roles, especially they would really benefit from a scribe, a dedicated note taker, because they are forgetful.
You bring up something else that I want to share. So as much as I ask a player to scribe, I also know, because I have the module, I also know what's going on in terms of story arc. And I know that we've got a larger network or whatever. We're the Lords and Ladies of the Nerdium is our larger group. And so we've got about, 25 people that belong to it. And so we pull down, like, who can play this weekend, or who can play, whatever. And so what I do is I use PowerPoint, and I have got an ongoing status report. And so on day set, etc., this happened, and it's just like the highlight. And then I also keep track and post the magic items that were collected, the monsters that were vanquished, the associated experience points. and I will take images and I'll also weave it in, and then I will convert it to PDF, right? I'll just print it as a PDF, which condenses it, and then I email it out to everybody. So even if you weren't able to play and somebody played your character for that session, you are still involved in the storyline. And so that is something that my players have become very accustomed to. And so it's just this ongoing saga until that campaign ends. And then we'll do a new one.
Yeah. I usually do a DM's recap at the beginning of every session of broadly what happened.
I hate that. I hate that because it's like session 0 every time. And and so I'm like, I will send an email out to everybody, sending the PDF out, right? The status report to everyone, asking them to come having read it.
As you were explaining, I was like, I bet he's going to say that. And then immediately my brain was thinking, is that something I should do?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a collaborative thing. Again, why should it fall on the game master to start every session with a recap? That, because, I mean, I've been on recaps that last an hour and a half. I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? I mean, it should be, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of it, but, high level, boom, boom, you should have read this, and if you haven't, grab your phone, pull up that email, and look at the last things that just happened, right? Because I spent all that time doing it so that I don't have to explain it right now.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, mine is usually like 2 paragraphs. It's usually about a minute or 2
right.
of them indulging me, just purely to bridge that gap of them not having taken notes.
Sometimes I'll have a player do it. Hey, John, you were at our last session. Give the group a quick recap while I'm doing some administrative work over here.
Yeah, I've heard arguments for both sides of DM recaps and player recaps, and pros and cons of both. Ultimately, sure. I erred with the DM doing the recap for various different reasons of benefits.
Well, the PDF is the source of truth, so.
And no one can argue with that.
That's right.
You mentioned you also play kind of a shared DM role, but you get plenty of opportunity to also be a player. Do you have any tools, tips, tricks to enhance your time as a player and not just as a DM?
Not really. I mean, the reason I want to play is so that I can sit back and experience it from the other side of the table, right? And it's really fun putting a character together, right? It's really fun to invest the time and effort into the player character. And one of the things that we've done, again, I'm going to speak to 3.5, is there was so much material toward the end of 3.5 before they made their move to 4th edition. We opened it on Beyond Core. So I actually printed off all of the feats in all of the supplemental books. And it comes to like 170 pages of stuff. I mean, it's just, there's like 1,000 feats.
170 pages? I thought you were going to say 170 feats. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot.
No, it's closer to like 1,000 feats in 3.5. Again, they just outgrew themselves, right? I mean, it was just like, we could do this, we do this. But I will tell you that it's been really fun to go through that and like really, really make a character that lives beyond iron will and improved initiative, right? And just your standard feats into like the, some very, very, interesting ones, right? And so I can do that as a player, but I can't really do that as a game master. So I would say that for me, as a player, I don't really have many enhancements. True confession, one of the reasons why I like to play also is that I can drink more, right? During game session, because I have to concentrate less.
Yeah,
right? It's really great to just, show up, sit back and have the story told in front of me and be involved, marginally, okay? You don't have that luxury as a game master. I mean, you need to be on like all the time. And so I like it. It's fun. And my players are very receptive to it because I'm very collaborative. But man, is it nice to just sit back and play.
Yeah, I feel you, man. I mean, I'm still riding my Christmas holiday of, my DM break, and for sure, and a DM in my other campaign as well, he's doing the exact same thing. So both of us are just kind of like on holiday right now, putting our feet up. And yeah, you got to, as you said, it's a collaborative thing, and the players got to put their skin in the game and stuff, but it's never anywhere near the amount of, how wired you have to be as a DM. Just like for 4 hours straight.
Yeah, I wish all players game mastered as well, because they would understand more and, I hope, appreciate more the amount of effort that goes into running a good session.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The preparation is unseen. It's like an iceberg, right? All you see is the stuff that's above the water, but all of the prep that goes into it, 80% is behind the scenes. It's unseen, it's unknown, especially if you're doing terrain, right? or for me, I'm making terrain, to match that particular session, or, more recently, because I've got this app, I've created some sounds that match our gaming session. Mm-hmm. And so that's like some new creative work. And again, it all just adds up to time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm drawing using online tools now to draw battle maps, which then I have to import into the tabletop, which then have to be, set up with the monsters and so on and so on. So yeah, that would be, I think we've eventually got there of one key enhancement a player can do is to maybe DM at some point, because it will inevitably make their playtime better, because you can engage with your DM at a higher level.
At a more empathetic level.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you can what they're going through at that point at the table with them, and you can meet them halfway a lot easier than just being oblivious to a certain extent. I'd always encourage my players, if anyone says, "Oh, I'm thinking about it," I'm like, "Yeah, please go ahead, if only because I'll get a week off." But the worst thing that happens is I get a week off. The best thing that happens is you come out the other side and think, "Oh my god."
No, you're right. It is good. And again, I don't want to, have your listeners think, "Oh, he doesn't like to game master." I love game mastering. Mm-hmm. But I also love playing. And so being able to do both, from my perspective, is a blessing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm fortunate enough to find myself in a similar situation right now. And yeah, let's just say I've very much enjoyed my time off. And exactly like you said, like when you've come to play and you can just go, "Hey, I know my class," and that's it. And everybody's happy, and I can just sit here and enjoy this class in a kind of distilled purity, whereas DMing, it's this chaotic maelstrom of numbers and things and people and
yeah. My hats are off to people that write modules, that write these storylines, right? Mm-hmm. For me, I need to see it on page. There's other things that my creative juices are flowing for, and it's not that I couldn't do it. I certainly could. And like I said, I will take a module and I've never just run it straight through. I've always homebrewed it. I've always, altered it, to best meet our players. But
writing one from scratch is a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, it is. I talk about, I've never talked about D&D and TTRPG, and any more than most recently, because, like I said, we've launched this app. Mm-hmm. And so, our friends and our family know about it now. And so it is not an easy game to understand. It's not an easy game to just run through. It's very, very involved, and it takes a lot of intellect to do it right. And so what I find is, the groups of people that I best engage with are pretty smart people, and it's nice. It's really nice. I mean, I miss the face-to-face play. I'll tell you.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
I went to a convention in November. Mm-hmm. And they had to limit the number, and everybody's all masked up. They've got, hand cleaning stations all over the place. And I'm sitting in the vendor space, and nobody's coming into the vendors area to talk to us, right? They are all so interested. I mean, people that are coming in from this, to play, they were coming in to play. Like they were, you could just like tell. It was palpable, right? It was just, okay, and as soon as one game was over, like, okay, what's next, right? As a group, everybody's just salivating, right? To just physically
hungry.
Be together. Yeah, it was awesome. It was really cool. And I look forward to that again, right? As we as a globe, right, achieve some kind of, herd immunity as vaccinations, take place, all this, it's going to come back. And I think that because our app, while it will work for online, it really, really shines
I bet.
in a face-to-face environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to using it in that environment, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to that that global celebration of everybody just having a big blowout and doing everything that we haven't been able to do, such as play face-to-face.
Totally.
And you mentioned there just one thing I wanted to say about D&D, and not everybody knows about it, and it's kind of tricky. But funny timing, because my mum, we were on the phone yesterday, and she went, "Did you know? I read on TV they're thinking about doing a Dungeons and Dragons movie." I was like, "Yeah, I know, Mum, but I really appreciate you trying to trying to join me on this thing you have no idea about."
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost 50, so I've been involved with D&D since middle school, and I've seen all these various, iterations, and I went through that phase where D&D was just this devil worshiper type thing, and you're right. My parents are engaged because they're, my mom sent me a screenshot she got from Facebook because she's like a top, promoter of our Facebook page or whatever, and she's really proud of that, So, and she, she's down in a retirement community in Florida, and she's like, "Oh, when I was talking to so and so's grandson, and he plays D, so I got him to download the app," and it was just like, it's really cool, right? That it's not like this secretive thing, right? That only crazy people do, right? It's certainly more out in the open than it has ever been, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's the hobby has enhanced, shall we say, to really put close that circle.
yeah, absolutely, it's awesome.
Is there anything you would like to talk about? Anything we might have missed in our topic of enhancements to the D&D experience?
Well, I mean, we talked about my enhancements. I'm sure that there are other people like, why didn't they talk about this, right? But, that this is very personal to me, right? So to make my game more interesting, right, I started collecting more figurines, then I started building terrain, and then I thought about, man, sounds would be pretty awesome, but there's really no good interface that dovetails in with the gameplay, right? So those are like the three things that I personally wanted to share with you today, Danilo. But I also, as we were dialoguing, it also kind of was like, there's modification of the module, there's the utilization of those initiative cards, being able to, package my figurines in a way that they're easily grabbable to keep the game flow. Like, okay, guys, we're going to take a 15-minute break while I set this up and I look for those, miniatures that I need. All of those things just really allow for a better immersive experience, which is, I think, is the name of the game when you're looking at enhancements. How to make this more immersive, but yet not like a video game, not like an augmented reality or, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want it to be that immersive because, let's face it, this is a tabletop role-play game. This is a fellowship game. This is like a collaborative thing. If you want to be that immersive, there's some awesome video games out there for you to get into that way, right? But I find that those are a little bit lonesome, personally, right? Because, I mean, I like the genre a lot, but I don't have all of the free time that I used to because, I'm kind of running two jobs here. And so I just love to just hang out with my friends, play the game, go through the challenges, be challenged as a player. And, the game mastery is already challenging, but just finding that magical blend, that magical area, like challenge, that tension through challenges and monsters and storyline setup, right, is just, it is so much fun.
Yeah, that unicorn, that bottled lightning.
Exactly.
So we've obviously talked about the My Sound Delve app. Is there anything else you'd like to plug, or tell us a little bit more about the app and where it's available?
Sure. Well, it's available on both Google and Apple, and you just type in My Sound Delve, DELVE, which will be in your show notes, I'm sure, and try it for free. Right, we put a bunch of free sounds out there for you to see, and what it is not just sound effects, but it's interfaced sound effects. So, for instance, I'm bringing up the app right now, and so I've got a character, Shathade, who is the sorcerer, and so I set up a sound for his dagger, and let's say that he needs an 18 armor class to hit. All right, and he missed. All right, we just heard a miss sound. Okay. And then he's got an Ice Storm spell that he casts, okay? And so I set that up in there, and...
Ita Daimaru, Kinewidu Gwinki!
All right, and 22 damage. And so it literally takes that math off the table, and the Apple version currently allows for imported sounds as well as recording in-app. And so next month, in February, we will have an enhancement on the Google side to bring that feature there as well. So it's unlimited personal sounds as well as our current 1,300 sounds. I'm doing monthly updates. So right now it's going to be our Monster Update 2. And so I've got 150 or so sounds that'll be uploaded in. So there's like dragon flyby attacks. I've included now gunslinger attacks. So I know that's important. And then in March, we'll have multi-attack as a feature update. And then I'm introducing 2 months of sounds specific to wargaming. And so, you mentioned Warhammer.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have a whole bunch of sounds in there for Space Marines and, orc fighting and all kinds of stuff that would be important. And then from there, I'm going to roll into a big science fiction release, which is going to be great for us because we play Starfinder,
Yeah.
But, there's check it out for free. Like I said, there's 1,400 now with my sounds. But there's phrases that are in there. There's Foley that are in there, which are like just background noises. And again, we are not ambient sound. This is just for your combat or for a skill check or for casting a spell, right? Or, one of the things that I play is a 4th edition based box game called Castle Ravenloft, in which, there's all you create your own little dungeon as you go along, and then there's random monsters or there's a quest that you're trying to solve. And I went through and I looked at all the cards that were in that game set, and I created a scenario for each of those cards. Right, so one of them is a butler. So I record. This is me. This is me using that card, Cyrus Bellevue from Ravenloft.
The master said we were expecting company. Allow me to escort you to your chambers.
So, boom! I just created that and saved it in there. And one of the things too that this app enhances or allows for is a game master to record sounds in their own privacy, save them, and then pull them up as it's needed so they don't have to do some acting at the table, right? Mm-hmm. They can act like a buffoon. They can act like over super serious, because not everybody is as comfortable doing that in a live session, but they could be more comfortable doing it in the privacy of their own space. So it allows for that as well. Right, which is fun. Like I said, I just did that Cyrus Bellevue card for the game, and so it works really well.
Yeah, I can imagine a table full of people all just dropping in their spells and their abilities and stuff as you go around the combat. Yeah, I can imagine it adds another dimension, a 4th dimension.
Ooh, yes, an oral experience.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, more than just my dumb English voice, which is what my players get.
Oh, we've got some English voices in there. I hired some video game voice actors to run through, and so one of them is
Bless this blade!
right, and it's it's been a lot of fun working with voice actors, video game voice actors, and one of our voice actors was in one of the Star Wars movies, Diablo, Neverwinter Nights, lots of good stuff.
Awesome. Well, excellent. I think that pretty much brings us to the end. So cool. Thank you ever so much, Christian, for coming on today.
It was my pleasure chatting with you, Danilo.
Awesome. Thank you. To everybody listening at home, thank you all for listening. If you have any thoughts or comments, you can find me on Twitter. Otherwise, thank you all, and good night.